Good evening. My name, and morning and noon and afternoon and day. My name is Herb and I'm an alcoholic. Welcome to our Big Book 12-Step Workshop. Please join me. God, please set aside everything that I think I know about myself, my unmanageability, the 12 steps in you, for an open mind and a new experience with myself, my unmanageability, the 12 steps, and especially you. Please join me in the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Well, we've had as our vision right from the beginning the statement, the promise, and our hope from step 12, having had a spiritual awakening. Bill uses the poetic metaphor of rocketed into the fourth dimension. He does that early in the book, in, I believe, page 25. It's a great metaphor. Rocketed into the fourth dimension. Well, as we looked at it, of course, what does fourth dimension mean? Well, perhaps it means, I don't recall ever hearing or reading anything by Bill about this, but back in the day, rocket travel was comic book stuff and speculation. 1939, when he wrote the book. But he had had a spiritual experience where it was mystical. Literally, he was taken to a place of the spirit, as he described it. The top of a mountain, the room filled with light. He felt as if a clean wind blew through him, and that he was absolutely in the presence of deity, the divine, the spirit. He was aware by the conclusion of that 20-minute experience that his alcohol problem had been removed permanently. No, he was completely convinced, not a doubt in his inner soul, that his alcohol problem had been removed. He was aware of the gift of the deliverance, and that his life's mission was to then attempt to help people who had the same problem as he did with alcohol get free of it in the same way he did. He was in the Oxford group, a Christian organization whose total purpose was the Christian gospel, conversion, evangelization, living a Christian life based on the Christian theology. Nevertheless, Bill heard it, did the steps. They're outlined on page 13 in terms of Ebby Thatcher's visit to the hospital in Bill's story. The very next day, he was like 3 or 4 days detoxing. The very next day, he had this mountaintop mystical experience. Fourth dimension in contrast to third dimension. Third dimensional world is the world we live in, the world of material, height, width, and depth. Many of you have had the experience of going to a 3D movie. The D stands for dimension. a depth perception that we're able to get when we wear these funny little glasses and watch the movie and have a whole new experience of actually being involved as if we were in the movie itself. Well, the fourth dimension is beyond the material dimension. It's the spiritual dimension, the non-measurable dimension. And the rocket launch, it's a metaphor that if you can follow it through, is okay, the rocket's here. The vehicle of transportation is here. We need to get on it. It doesn't come and scoop us up. We need to find it and get on it. But here's the really good news, and maybe some challenge. Once we get on it and in it, it takes us where it's going. That first step into the rocket is the surrender to the reality and experience that we need help and can't do it ourselves, and that the rocket might deliver us. I use that word very consciously tonight. Deliverance. Yeah. Because the rocket does the work of taking us to where it goes. Now, not without some manipulation, of course. The next 4 steps are taking a look at ourselves, an inventory of the things that are blocking us from the power, whatever that power is that the rocket ship is itself and is promised to deliver us to. We establish that relationship with the rocket, with the power of the rocket, actually. And then we establish a relationship with ourselves by removing and having removed. It's a co-creation experience in reality. It's not done without us, and it is done to us. I love the promises of the 5th step, which I've repeated many times in our journey this year. That image, poetic again, on page 75, walking hand in hand with the spirit of the universe. Co-creation. Yes, I needed to find the rocket. Yes, I needed to enter the rocket. But the rocket and the power of the rocket will take me where it's going. That's that co-creation. That's that hand-in-hand relationship. And it continues. We've just completed our instructions. You may not have completed steps 8 and 9, but we've completed the instructions on 8 and 9, which is establishing a relationship with ourselves, with others. So in the first 3 steps, we establish a relationship with power. In the next 4 steps, we establish a relationship with ourselves. And with the next 2 steps, maybe step 10 includes in that, but comments for that later. We establish a relationship with others. By removing the clouds, the curtains, the shadows, the cancers, and having them removed. Bill says on the title page of the book, and we looked at it quickly, but it was like 10 months ago. You might not remember. If you have your big book, take a look at the second title page. The first title page only has Alcoholics Anonymous on it, the title of the book, from the cover of the book. But the second title page has the title of the book, Alcoholics Anonymous, the story of how thousands of men and women have recovered a laser-focused, precise word to capture the promise of this rocket ride, recovered from the addiction. Yeah, recovered, past tense. Well, part of the process of steps 4 through 9, that establishing a relationship with ourselves and a relationship with others, I believe captures the forgiveness process. For those of you who didn't attend the workshop that was done with myself and Fred Luskin, the author of Forgive for Good, 2 or 3 weeks ago, I really recommend it. It's on YouTube. I have a YouTube channel, and I have some playlists there for different activities that I have. I've learned some vocabulary. And one of them will lead you to the spirituality series. And this is part of that monthly series that I've done this year on different topics. You're welcome to watch the whole thing. I do a review of the 12-step process, especially steps 1 through 9, as the process of forgiveness and the ingredients of and the experience that I had with it. Many of you have heard me in various events talk about that. So I would encourage you to skip that if in fact you've seen that before or heard me before. Although if you've heard me once, you've only heard me once. You know I change it every time. But the point is Fred Luskin. I've known him for 30 years, not well. I wouldn't call him a friend, but he's a colleague in the sense we do work in similar areas. And we have mutual respect for one another, but I've never been in front of him, with him, co-presenting like this. And it was just an experience for me. Don't miss it. Forgiveness is a process. And when you look up the word forgiveness in a dictionary, it says a decision to release. It's not to condone. Now, this is a summary of the ingredients in the meditation in the Way of Life document. Each one of you, I believe, has access to it in your computer and or you've downloaded the hard copy, which is what I recommended at the very beginning of our time together in January. And I think it's on page, well, I know it is, it's in front of me, 38 to 40. There's a meditation on forgiveness, and this is the essence of it. It's a very dense, meaning compact, summary of both the information and my experience with it, going from steps 4 through 9, and then doing a retrospective. Forgiveness is not to condone or forget or tolerate or ignore or approve or excuse or minimize. Forgiveness is not to pardon, to deny, to absolve, to reconcile. Please hear that. Forgiveness doesn't mean that you reconcile with the rascals. It might even be your parents or brothers and sisters or your children, and you may just not want to be around them anymore for various reasons, and you don't have to explain yourself. Forgiveness is not an invitation to allow them to hurt you again or to surrender justice. I've talked about that in my own commentary on, and some of the other points on forgiveness, so I'm not going to do it here. What is forgiveness? It's not a decision to retaliate, to exact revenge, to seek compensation, to judge. That's not forgiveness. What is it? It's a decision to release them. And paradoxically, we'll experience that we are released. And in the process, we are released ourselves. As we release them, we are released. Say, we release ourselves, but my experience is in looking in the rear view mirror or turning my head and looking back over my shoulder at my path is that spiritual math that I talk about. Regular math, 1 + 1 = 2. Spiritual math, 1 + 1 = 5. I do a lot of work. Anybody who is on this call right now has done a lot of work. Even attending the call is a lot of work because it's a weekly participation in a pretty robust conversation about life. And if you've done any of the work of the assignments, you've done a lot of work, more than most in a 12-step program, and certainly more than most human beings, even those committed to human development, personal development, therapy, and religion. And yet, my experience is, staying with the spiritual math, the outcome, the results of, the consequences of this process is disproportionately larger than my contribution to it. And my phrase that I use to capture my own experience is, I cannot get here from there, and yet here I am. Free. See, this is a process of freedom, and you've all been aware of and sometimes prayed the Our Father, the prayer in the Christian scripture. It's not a Christian prayer. It was created, at least in the literature, by a Jew. Jesus wasn't a Christian. Jesus was a Jew. All right. He was perhaps even a rabbi, certainly a teacher. And it's alleged in the Christian scripture that that was the prayer that he gave to his disciples. Well, in there it says, to the extent I release them from debt, I am released. Talking about forgiveness. And every week we pray, this year, it's a new process for me. We take a little extra time to pray the prayer of St. Francis. Now, St. Francis didn't write the prayer. St. Francis lived in the 12th or 13th century. The prayer was written in the 18th century. But it captures the philosophy of and the principles that St. Francis would have embraced. And in there, there's 2 references to forgiveness. Each of them are indicating this paradox. To the extent that I release them, forgive them, I am released. Paradox. Doesn't make any sense. And yet it's 100% my experience. This is Fred Luskin's summary. And I'll comment on the parallel to the step process. In step 4, we name our resentments, the hurt that we received, certainly columns 1 and column 2. And then we try to understand it by looking at how it affected us, column 3. Fred calls it, what was my hope? What was my expectation? Column 3 also allowed us to identify these subliminal rules that we have. I call them my beliefs, the lenses through which I look at reality. I look through the lenses of my belief at reality, and that's how I determine and conclude what reality is. But I'm looking through my beliefs, and any of you who did any work in column 3, or at least listen to the work that some of us did, we're very embarrassed and startled by the delusion of the beliefs that were so warped and corrupt. Fred Luskin calls them unenforceable rules. You should. I should. They should. Life should. Translate, fill in the blank. That's the key word and the litmus test. It will reveal to you your beliefs when you complete that incomplete sentence using the word should. And then all you have to do is not just accept it blindly or condemn it blindly, but ask yourself, is it true? Is it objectively true? Or is it just a story that we've been told and that we tell ourselves that isn't true? It could be a story from our family or from our faith, from our fellows, our culture. Sometimes they're true and sometimes they're not. And then in that fourth column, we took a look at reality, my role, my responsibility. And we looked at my attitudes and my motives. And once again, embarrassed and startled. It was shocking to see the corrupt nature of our motives, all about me. I couldn't believe it. I, who thought I was a Renaissance man, 48 years old, 4 years sober. And it turns out I'm actually a Neanderthal, and I am not exaggerating. I had everything, including the club of my knowledge and my energy to get my needs met, no matter what the collateral damage was. This is a process of identifying and understanding and accepting reality as it is, me as I am, and then taking full responsibility. Column 4 of the resentment inventory, the fear inventory, and then especially the sex inventory that identified the principles that I had that I ignored, or the principles that I would have wanted to have in order to be a decent human being that had eluded me for those 48 years. And I was able to accept that. With the humiliation, I developed some humility. To take the balance of the action. Step 5, to be transparent, to confess it. Step 6 and 7, again, to do more inventory on how all of this manifested in the way my emotions and my knowledge and my actions impacted other people. And then in 8 and 9, taking responsibility to correct all that harm that was done. It's a process of change. Isn't that the way we introduced spiritual awakening back in January, February, when we looked at step 12? Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps? A change in the way we think and feel and behave, and it's done to us, not by us, but not without us. I don't need to comment on any of that. You've heard it many times, and we reviewed it at the beginning, and we'll review it again in a couple weeks when we take a look at step 12 at more depth than we have before. It's a change in our attitude. It's an acceptance of reality. That's a huge shift. Most of us take reality personally. It's not personal. It just is what it is. The law of physics is gravity. Things fall to the floor. That's just what is. We can't negotiate that. And we make the same application to the principles that we have developed, discerned, and listed as desirable principles for living our life so that we'll be in alignment with reality. But nothing happens without action. I change my attitude, I accept reality, and I take actions. Yes, I like alliteration. It makes it easy to remember. This is a saying that came to me in one of my meditations about 5 years ago as I was looking over, meditating on and fine-tuning my meditation on forgiveness, which I wrote 30 years ago when I did that panel with Fred Luskin and met him for the very first time. It's a very in-your-face confrontive saying, as you get used to hearing some from me. A forgiving person has no past, but an unforgiving person has no future. That's pretty black and white. And what I mean by it, of course, is that if you're all tangled up in the emotions of the past and you stay there, you're bound to repeat it. And it's a prophecy of your present and your future. As long as you hold on to the hot coal, it will burn through your soul. So this is the promise of the first 9 steps, isn't it? We come in because we're suffering from our addiction. And then we learn we're also suffering from our humanity. The very thing that makes me uniquely human is my free will, is the very thing that is at the source of my suffering. Now, I asked that question the very first workshop. I asked you to make a note. What is your source of suffering? Reflect on it. Write it out. I had you do it that first workshop. You may have done it. I asked you to date it, keep it in your book. I didn't. I said, I'm not asking you what your suffering is. I'm not asking you what your current suffering is. I'm asking what your source of suffering is. And there may be many answers to that question, but I discerned in my own circumstances the absolute source of my suffering, as described in the big book and experienced doing the steps 1 through 9 process, was my self-centeredness. And not only was I promised freedom from my addiction, remember the comments about recovered? I'll make more of those as we get into step 10. The book in step 10, pages 84 and 85, talks about placed in a position of neutrality. But it also says we're not cured. That's a reference to the unmanageability, not the addiction. The first half of the first step has 2 components, all about addiction. When I start, I cannot stop. When I stop, I cannot stay stopped. I need power. Unmanageability is all about self-centeredness. And at the end of the second paragraph on page 62, Bill says, and we can't even reduce it much by wishing or trying on our own power. And it's the shadow that prevents us from having an effective relationship with power. Unmanageability is the cancer of the soul. And as you can see here, in contrast to the prior cartoon, there are no walls. There's no ceiling. There's no floor. There's just pathetic Herbie, a victim in delusion, because all I have to do is drop the bars and take responsibility for walking out of the desert. I'm holding the bars, nothing else. No ceiling, no floor, no walls. Dan Sherman, a good friend of mine, passed away about 5 years ago, wrote a book called Big Book Awakening. And in there, he had this comparison. We started out looking at that unmanageability as the spiritual malady, the second half of the first step. And I indicated, based on my experience, that that's the source of our problem. Based on the interpretation of the big book, it suggests that the bedevilments on page 52 are the promises of unmanageability. The bedevilments on page 52 are the behavioral description of what unmanageability looks like. And then at the end of step 9, there are some promises on pages 83 and 84. It's a pretty short trip from page 52, unmanageability, to freedom, the promises on page 83. All right, 30 pages, what? 31 pages. It's in that work that something happens to us. Transformed. Bill calls it a spiritual awakening. You can call it anything you want. I call it a change in the way we think and feel and behave. The three things that comprise us: our body, behave; feeling, our emotions; thinking, our mind; and our will. Our mind that allows us to know, and our will that allows us as a function to make free decisions. I am not free with regard to addiction. I am in bondage of addiction until I'm not. And that's a gift. I can't earn it. I can't create it. I can only receive it. Placed in a position of neutrality. I'm quoting page 84, I believe. And so Dan had this insight. I don't know whether Bill Wilson had it or not, and whether he structured it this way intentionally and consciously, but it's a magnificent description of the conversion experience, that turnaround that we talked about in column 3, column 4, and in the fear inventory, and quite frankly, in the sex inventory, that turnaround to live a life on principles. The bedevilment. This is the unmanageability manifestation behavior. We are having trouble with personal relations. But once we finish the 9th step, now hear me please, once we finish the 9th step, it may happen sooner, but it's guaranteed in the big book to happen by the end of the 9th step. The 9th step says before we were halfway through. I think that's Bill tossing us a bone of hope. It wasn't my experience that I was aware at the end of the 9th step. It might have happened sometime earlier, but I wasn't aware of it, that I've been given the freedom. I was having trouble with personal relations, and what I recognized is I lost the interest in selfish things, and I gained interest in my fellows. I wanted to be helpful. Self-seeking will slip away. Notice the process. Notice the contrast. I couldn't control my emotional nature. I will comprehend the word serenity, and I will know peace. For 32 years, my life has flourished. Not without its speed bumps. Most of you have heard me share some of the little ones and some of the major ones, and some of you have even experienced them. I am a prey to misery and depression. My whole attitude and outlook upon life changed. I couldn't make a living. I had to add something there because I was making a wonderful living at that time from a financial standpoint, from a social and cultural standpoint, but I was never satisfied. I couldn't make a living that satisfied me. Fear of people and of economic insecurity will leave us. I began working not for money, but for other motives, especially in my 12-step work. I have a feeling of uselessness. Well, that all changed. I have a total feeling of usefulness. That feeling of uselessness and self-pity disappeared. I was full of fear. I intuitively know, as I practiced beginning in 1988, my meditation consistently on a daily basis, from then till now, intuitively know how to handle situations that used to baffle me. Intuitively know, literally, or at least attempt to be a channel of grace in dealing with helping people in the workshop. And you've seen it happen. I say things that I don't even know where it comes from, and it seems to be helpful. I was unhappy. I am going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. I couldn't seem to be of real help to other people. And you know my background. That was the delusion that I had, that I was going to help people professionally in many different circumstances, all of them very corrupt motives that I had never seen until I did this work. It actually turned out that I actually originally didn't want to actually help people. I wanted the reputation of helping people. I wanted the money and the prestige and the professional credentials that went with it. It wasn't about them, it was all about me, that narcissistic projection onto reality. I can't seem to be of real help to other people. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, or no matter how much corruption we have in our beliefs and our motives, I just added that, we will see how our experience can benefit others. We will not regret the past, nor wish to shut the door on it. A process, of course, of forgiveness. Forgiveness of others, and eventually, as the result of that process, of forgiveness of ourselves, or maybe even a very intentional supplemental process of self-forgiveness that we've talked about and I've recommended. And then the final wrap, or the final conclusion of this. And most of all, we will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. That spiritual math that I talked about. I mean, there may be other explanations that we will discover through some type of brain science or chemical analysis. I'm not overly concerned about that. I've accepted the story. There is a power other than myself. Sometimes I call it God, and sometimes I don't. You've heard my various synonyms that I use, and it doesn't matter what word we use. I believe that there's an organismic life force of some kind and that we all participate in it. Recently, I think I've written I've told you, I've written a meditation on God is consciousness. I haven't completely unpacked it yet, but I've written it out and I think it's been distributed. If it hasn't, I'll make sure that you receive it. It's a pretty interesting thought. It goes right back to that life is an organic life force, which means it permeates all reality. Bill saw it. He was a mystic in this area. Page 53, God is or God isn't. What's your choice? If your choice is God is, then it includes God is everything. That it's logic. Not only is it good logic, but it's good theology. It's good philosophy. That's what's implied in that concept. God is consciousness. To the extent that I'm conscious, I'm participating in the light. I'm participating in the Spirit. That's the spiritual shield that Bill implies when he says we have a daily reprieve, we're not cured. Fit spiritual condition. We'll look at that maybe today, maybe tomorrow, next week. Well, what happened here? And so we enter the world of the Spirit, Bill says, right after step 9 on page 84. We enter the world of the Spirit. Well, I'm a big book literalist and fundamentalist. Here we are finishing step 9, assuming from the book's description of the instructions. We're finishing step 9. We enter the world of the Spirit. I have to ask for a minute, stop, pause. Well, where the hell have we been? Oh, yeah, in the world of self. I have a body that's subject to addiction. That's a genetic reality. There's nothing to be guilty about. There's nothing to be shamed about. It's the warp and woof of your very being. Now, that's not science yet with regard to addictions other than alcohol. It is science with regard to the addiction of alcohol. The alcoholic liver is different. It's genetically different. It was born that way. It doesn't process alcohol successfully. But most of us have seen that our mind do not successfully process reality successfully. It's probably true of all human beings, but not to the extent of the addict. We do not learn from the consequences of our behavior. Normal people, 9 out of 10 people, 6 out of 10 people, whatever the ratio is, learn from their mistakes, especially when they're severe, like jail and hospitalizations and lacking or firing from employment and the bust up of relationships and all of the rest of the chaos and mayhem that our addictions caused in our lives. Most people grow up, take responsibility for their lives and the impact of their behavior on others, but we don't. At least not as soon as it would be warranted. But we also have this free will. And then we learn it's not free at all in unmanageability. My will is condemned very definitely to choose me. Now, that's not the addict problem. That's the human problem. I speculate because of my religious tradition and my background in that religious tradition, that's the origin of original sin. Original sin. That is, it's baked into human nature. I think that was their unfortunate explanation for sin. Today, we more gently approach the word sin, at least I do, as missing the mark. I think it comes from archery, missing the mark. Wonderful, gentle. Oh, I just missed the mark. Oh, I just missed I made a mistake. I can correct that. All human beings have a rite of passage from childhood to adulthood. Normal people, whatever that means, they make that passage, not with any elegance, usually with a lot of suffering, actually. But they make the transition at some point, age 30, 40, 50, someplace in there, due to suffering and or maybe good modeling, or maybe good religion, or maybe good relationship, or maybe good education. Lots of ways people can achieve a maturity and adulthood. We just struggle. Oh my God, we just struggle. But this word promises that. It promises freedom from addiction, recovered, as I mentioned. Physical sobriety. But it doesn't promise spiritual sobriety or emotional sobriety in the same way. It says we're not cured. We have a daily reprieve. At the end of step 9, we're placed in a position of neutrality. I'm quoting, placed in a position of neutrality with regard to our addiction. But unless we have the protection of a spiritual shield, no, that's not in the big book. That's a metaphor that I use to try to communicate the effectiveness of steps 10, 11, and 12. And it's a daily reprieve, Bill suggests. We are rocketed into that fourth dimension. This is the spiritual shield, a relationship with other with a capital O. That's signifying God, other with a capital O, in contrast to a relationship with others with a small o. This is the orbit that we're rocketed to, this fourth dimension, not cured. Suggests a practice. The word I don't believe is in the big book, practice, but it's what all spiritual traditions or human development traditions talk about, a practice. Bill says on page 60, we're not perfect, and that's never going to be a goal. It's not a healthy vision statement to be perfect. Progress, that's wonderful. That implies practice. A practice of what? Step 10. Next week, I'll talk about its relationship to emotional sobriety. I think it's the primary tool for emotional sobriety. I said, and the word's not in the big book, but I said for step 3 that it's about alignment. In step 2, I make a decision that there is a power. And in step 3, I make a decision to align myself with that reality. And then steps 4 through 9 are the process of the turning to be in alignment. Because I'm out of alignment when my life is unmanageable. I'm out of alignment when my life is filled with addiction. In order to get free of addiction and get free of unmanageability, did you hear me? Free of unmanageability, we are empowered to manage our lives. In some rooms, that might sound unorthodox. We are not going to allow God to manage our lives. I'm sorry. I didn't get my mind and my free will in order for something else to manage it. But it does provide empowerment, very much like plugging in for the cell phone, as I've mentioned earlier at other times. My cell phone's of no use to me if it doesn't have power. But when it's plugged in, then I can use it responsibly. Step 10 is about emotional sobriety, to recognize when I'm out of alignment and to realign myself on the spot. The key to step 10. There's no delay here for writing. There's no delay here for night. There's no delay here. On the spot. More about that next week. Step 11, to improve my understanding. I choose that word from the step itself. Sought through prayer and meditation to improve my conscious contact. And in this material that we will look in depth at next week, it says the 2 things that are important are our understanding and our effectiveness. That's what comes out of managing our lives. That's what comes out of fostering our spiritual condition with the practice of steps 10, 11, and 12. I hope you saw that. My PowerPoint person takes pride in creating some movement here. And so we're in this rocket ship going into the fourth dimension to a relationship in orbit with the light. Cool. I use the term conscience for step 10. Bill calls it watch for. In the list of principles in the back of the Way of Life document on step 10, I use the word vigilance. Not in any sense of rigor or stress, but it's the filter. What's the principle? If I'm disturbed, what's the principle that I'm transgressing? What's the principle I need to be in alignment with? My conscience is my guideline, my guardrail. I use both words, guideline and guardrail. Words are important. Step 11 is about consciousness, a conscious contact. Bill uses the term a God of our understanding. Quite frankly, I want to challenge everything. And when I challenge this, I come out with the words, a God of my not understanding, because I don't understand God and I don't pretend to, and I don't, quite frankly, have a goal to understand God. Think of the term. How can my finite mind comprehend infinite? The bucket's too small for the ocean. And I use the word compassion for step 12. Could use the word altruism, but it wouldn't be the alliterative that I'm looking for. Conscience, consciousness, and compassion. Altruism is a wonderful word to describe unconditional love, as I've mentioned before, and this is more a summary of all of that. Altruism. Doing something for the benefit of somebody else with no possible benefit to me, including recognition. I use the word improve my understanding because improve is in the step 11, understanding is in the material that we'll look at next week. In terms of step 11, improving my mind and my consciousness. I use the word enlarge from when we looked at what Bill talked about insanity with Jim's story. He failed to enlarge his spiritual life. And when we looked at the bottom of page 14, it said we perfect and enlarge our spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others. So I use that word for step 12. We enlarge our spiritual life through sacrifice. It's interesting. I don't think I've said this before in the journey this year. The word sacrifice comes from two Latin words, sacer, which means holy, S-A-C-E-R, means holy, making holy. And facere, F-A-C-E-R-E, is a verb to make. Sacrifice, to make us whole, W-H-O-L-E. I play with words because it gives me a sense of connection to the underlying dynamic, or I put a meaning into the words so that it elevates my spirit. You have to ask yourself, do I have a sense of well-being? Here you are. You're the survivors. It's the end of October. You've been at it for 10 months. You might have come in later, but we've been here 10 months doing this work, talking this stuff, being real serious about life and our lives especially. Do I now have a sense of well-being, or do I have hope now? It's on the horizon as the result of this work. Do I have a sense of contentment? These are questions that lead us into emotional sobriety, of course, because they're not about addiction. They're about unmanageability or manageability. This sets us up for next week and the weeks to follow to talk about emotional and spiritual sobriety. Emotional sobriety, step 10. Spiritual sobriety, I believe, at least it's the way I'm looking at it, parsing it, steps 11 and 12. I see it as a coin. In step 3, we make a decision to turn from our self-centeredness to other-centeredness. Other with a capital O and other with a small o. Two sides of the same coin. All coins have two sides, even though one side may be blank, it still has a second side. Spiritual sobriety is my relationship with power and my relationship of contribution to people. So it says in the book, are these extravagant promises? We think not. They are being fulfilled among us, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. The process. I refer to this practice as a process. We've talked about it consistently from the beginning. I use the dimmer switch analogy. It goes on at a very low voltage with a very little electricity in the channel. But as we put more voltage of electricity, more power into the channel, the lights get brighter. And as I've said, to really elevate our vision, the real good news is that we're in pursuit, in orbit of, in relationship with infinite light. There's no end of this. They are being fulfilled among us, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. Listen to this promise as we exit from step 9. They will always materialize if we work for them. This thought brings us to step 10. That transition is really overlooked in many circumstances. The promises will always materialize if we work for them. This thought brings us to steps 10, 11, and 12, actually. That's the work. That's the way of life. A daily reprieve because we're not cured. A daily maintaining of this spiritual shield that protects us from the return of the obsession, which means relapse inevitably.
Homework.
Oh yeah, no, thank you. And that, of course, is step 10, and that would be assignment 23. It's 2 pages. Even though you've read it at the beginning, maybe you've read it between then and now, reread it. It's really dense. Maybe use a different color highlighter this time and say, okay, so we're going to have a really, we're going to take a flashlight to it and we're going to unpack it. Is there anything else? Use that set aside attitude and see if there's anything else. Read the 12 and 12. I will be referencing the 12 and 12 in more than I normally do in any step, because for me, the 12 and 12 broke the code on the use of step 10. And I'll talk more about that next week. Yeah.
So I wanted to share, I think it was a big thing that happened to me. I just came back from 4 days in New York City with my baby, who turns 38 years old tomorrow, my youngest son.
Right.
And, as you can imagine, not very often that I have that one-on-one time with any of my kids. And it's hard for me to talk about this without kind of tearing up. But I was kind of on the way out there. I was thinking, darn, I wanted to do some step 9 work. But I remembered what you said. Don't just do this based on what you think would be the smartest thing. Write it out and talk to somebody else. And I hadn't done that before I left. So I thought, this is not the time. But we did have so many opportunities and had a lot of really heartful conversations with each other. And I heard that the St. Francis prayer in my ear, several times, saying, listen to understand, listen to understand. I mean, that was all I could remember out of the prayer, but it was just this: listen to understand, listen to understand. And I had a lot of opportunity in that 4 days. And one of the things I realized last night when we were flying home was how I came into recovery. I started my recovery journey 20 some years ago, and I've made amends to my children over that time. But what I realized was that my goal in my amends to them was always this desire for them to understand how much I love them. Nice. And that I didn't mean to hurt them. I meant the best. But my motive was self-centered. It was that they would understand me.
Yeah.
They would understand me, so they would forgive me.
It's a reasonable motive.
Yeah.
No, it's not the singular motive, but it's a reasonable motive. So gentle, gentle, gentle.
But what I wanted to really share about that was how much richer the conversations we had, because he wanted me to know him.
Well, yes, but he also got permission.
He got permission
from you because you were willing to listen, and it was the vibe you gave off. You didn't have to even say it because that's who you were. You were a listening, understanding person.
Yeah.
And he got it. So he was able to be more vulnerable to want you to know him.
Right. Right.
Oh, that's cool.
It was really cool. And then the other piece of that was I realized, how you've been saying to us over the last several months, it happens, it's right. Like, it just happens to us. Yeah. We can't make it happen. It just will happen.
Right.
And I realized I didn't go into that this weekend with saying, God, please help me just listen. Help me just listen. I just showed up and I was being told what, it was just happening. And I felt like I couldn't have planned for a better opportunity than what it turned out to be. It was just,
right.
Yeah, it was, and I felt like it was done to me. I didn't do it. I just showed up, sort of.
One of my explanations of prayer is that prayer is about intention, our intention. It's not about the words. But in praying, the words we use and our intentions don't change God. They change ourselves.
Yeah.
So the connection you're making is for several weeks. 10 plus 4 is 40. For 40 weeks, you've been praying the St. Francis prayer once a week at the end of this, or at least listening to us pray it. And we become it.
Yeah.
Subliminally. I think that's what prayer does as we are intent. That's why consciousness is so important, that we are conscious of our intention and we want to express it in the words, and we want to be conscious of the words. Although the words are not important, of course, they're representing our intentions. And the more conscious it is, the more we assimilate it. I'm confident that's true.
Yeah.
And so then we be it. Yeah.
Yeah. And it feels like, I almost feel like and I don't know if this is good or bad, but I just feel like I've spent a lot of years, working so hard to change who I was and my behavior. And I have changed a lot of behavior and to become who I want to be and who I think God wants me to be. But I've been doing the work, it's like I'm doing the work. All of a sudden, for the first time, I feel like I'm afraid to say the word, but just trust or relax and trust that if I stay present and I doing my prayers, that it'll just happen to me. Yeah. It'll just happen.
Yeah. Well, because that's your experience.
Yeah. So anyway, I just wanted to share it, and thank you. Because
thank you.
Yeah, that's good.
Thank you.
All right. What I want to share about is that I'm aware today, more aware of when I fell back into unconsciousness and when I'm living in the consciousness, and the pain of and the discomfort when I find myself in the unconsciousness is it's just so powerful that it's it almost forces me to like yearn to go back to the consciousness.
Yes, of course.
I can't be there anymore. I can't be there. I want to throw up. I can't be there anymore.
Once you take the farm girl out of the farm and put her in New York, you can't go back to the farm. Sorry.
Yeah, you're right. And I'm grateful that I can't go back there. Wasn't that great? In that farm. I suffered there a lot.
Right.
So I'll just say where I noticed it is that yesterday, my husband is learning from a religious spiritual book with a bunch of students on Zoom, and I'm sitting in the kitchen, and I'm saying, "Oh my God, does he have a 12? Was he on this group? Is he in the 12 steps? Like, where is he getting this stuff from?" And I'm just hearing him, and it's like I'm hearing a repeat of what we have here. So later on, when we were sitting together, I said to him, like, what was that written in the book, really? Like, tell me, show me what was written. He said, no, it wasn't written. It's what I've been hearing from you this entire past year about this self-centeredness. But Herb, what really
that's amazing.
Yeah. That's what
I'm not surprised. I'm so pleased, though. Yeah.
And it's not like I sit down and talk to him about him. I talk more about myself and that. But what really pained me over there was that it wasn't enough for me. I want my husband to get down on his hands and knees and beg forgiveness from me. Mm-hmm. And that really hurt me. It made me sad because he really was doing it in a different way. Mm-hmm. It's almost like I want him to become belittled. I need to be validated. Mm-hmm. But that's when I'm in the unconsciousness again, because I am validated. I'm validated by God by the fact that I'm sitting here and open to receive something.
And you don't need to elevate yourself by diminishing him.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, that's the narcissistic part that I noticed.
It's just old self-centered, inconsiderate behavior. It's very human. That's what people do, but it's not healthy. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just was grateful that I saw it.
Yeah.
I was able to see it. I was able to stop and pray at that moment. That's what I did. I just prayed at that moment that God lifted from me. I don't need it anymore. I don't need to feel better by putting someone else down.
Yeah. Right. Well, it also reinforces the phrase that we've heard, and I may have said it a couple of times, wherever you are, preach the good news if you have to use words. You see, you're not using your words, you're just being who you are, which is a changed person. He's picking up on the changes, hearing some of your words, of course, probably indirectly, but maybe directly. And so you're not trying to teach him, or you're not trying to show him, but your very being is, both teaching and showing.
Yeah, it's like when Ebby came to Bill.
Yeah, right.
And Bill says, I was waiting for him to preach, but he didn't.
Right. Good point. Thank you. Yeah, that's exactly right. Now he just shared his experience in a very calm, non-salesy way. That's right. Mm-hmm. Yep.
So all I could say is really a big, real big thank you. I'm so grateful.
Well,
so
welcome. Very welcome.
You go back through the thing you were saying about sacrifice.
Oh, sacer, facere. Sacer is Latin word for holy or priest. And sacerdotal means, the roles of priest. Facere is the Latin word, verb for to make or to create. Both those words are the root words of sacrifice. And anyway, I think you get that. Well, we're into some more stuff next week. Step 10, emotional sobriety, as well as some of the work that you're doing that you want clarification for or confirmation of. So please join me in this prayer that we talked about today, written in the 18th century to reflect they're really perennial, eternal, perennial, constant, no matter what the tradition is, principles of decent human living. Lord, make me a channel of your peace, that where there is hatred, I may bring love, that where there is wrong, I may bring the spirit of forgiveness, that where there is discord, I may bring harmony, that where there is error, I may bring truth, that where there is doubt, I may bring faith, that where there is despair, I may bring hope, that where there are shadows, I may bring light, that where there is sadness, I may bring joy. Lord, grant that I may seek rather to comfort than to be comforted, to understand than to be understood, to love than to be loved. For it is by self-forgetting that one finds, it is by forgiving that one is forgiven. It is by dying that one awakens to eternal life. Amen. I've shared that before. This is a process of dying, the dying of the false self. It's like the death of the false self and the resurrection of the true self, so that we can really live life fully. Yeah, fully. There's a book called Fully Human, Fully Divine. I love the title. Thanks, everybody.